Hi, welcome back to the Therapy Diaries. Today we have Dr. Abhishek Patil with us, a professor of psychology and leadership in the MBA program at Sophia University, who also brings his expertise as a seasoned strategist. Abhishek's work is truly interdisciplinary, combining his academic role with real world experience in business and technology. With a PhD in psychology, Abhishek's approach to teaching leadership is truly informed by his understanding of human behavior and decision making. As a strategist, he applies these insights to create human centered, impactful solutions in business and product development for global companies and hotels. His unique blend of psychology and strategy not only equips future leaders with tools to excel, but also shows them how to connect meaningfully with the people they serve. Today, he'll be sharing his journey and how psychology informs his approach to leadership, innovation, and creating strategies that truly resonate. Welcome to the show.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. I'm so happy that we could connect and speak about, psychology and how things are shaping life with us today and sort of the different roles that, history and family and position in life um, play within us and how they kind of come out when we're in the real world.
Can you tell us a little bit about your psychology journey and how you've used it in your profession?
Oh, so that's a really interesting question because I would say my professional life is a mosaic of a lot of different um, experiences in education and activities that have now brought me here. So I initially started my journey as a computer engineer. Again, parental pressure, understanding of where people are going today.
Yeah.
Moving into then, I kind of rebelled and moved into product design, which was a little bit of a fight, and nobody understood what I'm doing, why I'm going there. And then finally, I found my way into psychology. And the idea for that was because everything that we do today, we interact with human beings. Whether it's a product, whether it's a design, whether it's art, we're interacting with human beings. And as with my role as a strategist in New York, I think all of these three fit together in a perfect delta because I have the technical background, I have the understanding of design, and then finally I have how it affects people and how people are going to perceive and feel when they interact with things. So again, very interesting journey just because started off with parental expectations of, typical be an engineer, be a doctor. Both my parents are doctors. And I think nobody had an idea of why I was doing these three very different things. And finally, when they came together, it was like an aha moment. It made sense to everybody. And I think that was also one of the first times I got my father's acceptance of like, okay, you have now continued the legacy of being a doctor.
Amazing. So, like you said, parental pressure and family expectations. Let's talk about these very important topics. Can you tell us how overcoming family legacies and expectations work?
So it's so family plays a very important role, whether it's Indian culture, Western culture, any culture. And since we're young, there's a lot of spoken and unspoken principles, rules, behaviors that we pick up from our parents. How they deal with stress, how they are with relationships, how they treat other people, how they work. And what happens is, as we're kids, we start to pick up these cues. So when something bad happens, is there a lot of rage in the house? Is it a very peaceful situation? When times are bad, are people stressed? Are they motivated? And eventually that does kind of reflect onto the child, and the child starts to absorb these things, getting to a point where they build their own personality based on what your parents are. So, a lot of times the typical psychology, let's say, what do you call it? Cliche is, um, you know, go back to your mother or go back to your father. It is a cliche, but it is actually very true. So if you know Sigmund Freud, one of the things he said was for a man to become his own man, or for a boy to become his own man, his father must die. Of course, proverbially. That means he really needs to break out of the shadow of his father in one way or the other. And I think that's a really important role because the patriarchal authority of an Indian father, and also in many other countries, is so strong that it really does define the child and how he's going to like live the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think Indian parents control or kind of, have a say in a child's life to a very later stage compared to other cultures. They would like you to follow a certain way of being, your career paths, who you marry, who you don't marry, how you live your life. They kind of want to overrule how you feel. I think it's a cultural thing. I don't think it's right or wrong. But like you said, in many other cultures it may exist as well, but in ours for sure. And can you tell us how our family histories and generational experiences shape our beliefs, behaviors, and well being?
So you brought up a really good point, right? That the Indian parent or parents in general like to have a say in a very later stage, even in a man's life, a child's life, woman's life. What happens, I believe, is a lot of times the parent and the authoritative figure here doesn't really see the child, even if it's a full-grown adult, as an equal.
Correct.
So a lot of times it is, you have to listen to me, I'm right. I have this fight every day. You have to listen to me, you have to do this is the right way to do things because I've done it this way. And I think what happens in a lot of times is because of that expectation and that pressure, the child starts to react to it negatively and starts to feel like, okay, I need to become something, and if I'm not that, then I'm in trouble or I'm a failure. And that's a very negative impact. On the flip side, the father, the authoritative figure, I mean, even in the house, the mother and the daughter relationship is very similar. You have to be the perfect daughter, you have to be the perfect wife. Working was never a thing, achievement at work was not a thing. So there's like a dichotomy, right? So on one hand, this pressure can be overwhelming. It can have negative impacts, which is, I would say, most common than not. I mean, take any example, right? Sachin Tendulkar, Amitabh Bachchan, any of the celebrities, Michael Jordan even, their children have not reached their level and their expectations were very high. It's very seldom that a hyper successful parent has a hyper successful child.
Correct.
And the only moment I've seen that this happens is when the parent is grooming the child and treating him as an adult. So it's almost like a training that's happening. Not like, look what I'm doing, you have to do this. But it's like a nice grooming, like, look, this is why I did it. I think the why is very important because a lot of times, even for children of doctors or engineers or whatever, they're like, no, you have to become a doctor. Why? There's no why. It's a great business. Life is be good. You'll be happy. You'll make lots of money. Sometimes that doesn't resonate with the child because the child doesn't understand the value of money.
Not only that, the goals can be completely different.
Exactly. So again, there's this there's a beautiful illustration that I've seen, and there's a story behind it where you can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. And that's what I feel like, right? When it comes to children and parents, it's yes, the father was successful in a certain aspect, but you can't expect the child to be, the same way. There's a certain personality that you need to become a businessman, become a doctor, become an engineer. And if your child does not have that personality trait, or anybody, it's not easy for them. And now they're fighting an uphill battle. So, where we see these instances trickle down into childhood is the child is now trying to be a very sharky businessman, but he might be a creative and he's having fun, he likes people, and that can be viewed as weakness because the father was never like that or the authority was never like that. And those are the challenges that I think children face is they look up to somebody as a role model and they've seen this person, kind of build an industry, build a family, take care of the home, and now they're like, okay, this responsibility is going to fall onto me. Another time where I've seen that this works really well, again, not always, is when the father knows, look, I'm going to hand this over to you. You have to be prepared for it. Then when they're both aligned, they both work towards the same goals. This happens a lot in politics, where children are groomed that, look, this is how I've done it, this is why people value me, this is how I run things. And that's why they start to make their own image and they start to build their own personality to not follow along, but just figure out what is the next version of this, right? What's the next generation? Because what worked in our parents' generation in the past, even with millennials and Gen Z, is not going to work with the coming generation, their next generation, and moving forward.
That's a great point because, also what you said, I feel like it comes from, correct me if I'm wrong, let's say my father started his business or his career journey in the 80s, and his financial status, whatever it may be at that time, whatever he required to do to build a business, to build a family, to build a career for himself isn't the starting point for me. So as a child, my starting point is completely different, which is why the inspiration, the hard work, and the mindset is completely different. So when a lot of parents may have been doctors, their starting point in the 60s, 70s, or 80s was very different. That was one of the main careers that were money making at the time. Today, you can make money even on YouTube. So the starting point is completely different, which I think parents tend to forget. Your child is growing up with privileges that you didn't grow up with. So their perspective of life will be completely different to yours. You did not have what we have from like childhood. So I think that completely changes how you view life, how you view your career path, how you view your married life, or what you want from your life.
Perfect. I think you said it very well because that is something that's so important, right? We've all heard this. I've gone to school, I've walked 20 kilometers through a river, climbed a mountain. You have life so easy. I gave you everything. You don't have to worry about your education and things like that. So now the expectations are even higher, right?
Yeah.
Our parents or our parents' parents, they were like, okay, you're kind of on your own, and they figured it out. And that's, I believe, why they made it.
Exactly.
And it's so funny because there was a really funny incident where, Nana Patekar, he told this story where he was like, I talked to my kid, and I feel like my kid doesn't get along with me that well. And the kid told him, and which was, I think, really wise, where he said, Dad, you are the son of a farmer. You're this way. But I'm a son of a movie star, so now I am this way, so I have to forge my own path. And that goes back to what I said in the beginning, where the father must proverbially die for the son to become his own self. And once you stop living in that shadows, right? There's so many books written about this. So Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad,
That's a great book.
From generationally, like I said, grandparents, they were maybe poor. They had a hard life. I mean, India was a tough time. Everywhere was a tough time. They had a hard life, and their mindset was, let's save. Let's save, something will happen. Let's save, we can do this. So
Also,
again,
their survival was completely different to our survival.
exactly. So they didn't have the luxuries and liberties that we had. And again, everybody worked towards this goal, right? For us to be free, for us to be able to do what we want. And I think, when you accumulate wealth, when you accumulate status, I don't think wealth in the sense of like enormous amounts of wealth. It's I can provide enough for my family to be successful. I feel like the opportunity that you're creating, which a lot of people don't understand, is not that, okay, now take this and carry it forward and grow it. It's like, look, I created this so you can be comfortable and pursue your dreams, pursue whatever you want to do. And tomorrow they want it to be a movie star or a singer or a YouTuber. It's allowing them to express that emotion and feeling and completely feel like they have the liberty to do it with the security of, what, I don't have to worry about a roof on my head. Now, that's a very specific niche of people that can say that, right? That I want to be, my passion is to be an artist. And am I going to sell anything? I don't know. But I don't have to worry about, food at home. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to stay and certain things like that. But I think that allows a person to really express themselves truly and find their own, rather than, oh my God, now I have to take care of something, so I have to keep going, right? It's this like rat race, what we call it, or this treadmill that we're kind of always moving towards it. And if we don't live up to that expectation, it always feels like a failure. So I feel like that is something that we have to break away from. And parents need to understand this by giving their kids, some sort of support to feel like, look, whatever you're doing, fine, try it fully. If you want to be an artist, try it. If it fails, it's okay. You have food at home, you have a house, I'm here for you. What's the next thing you want to do? And eventually they might come into their own, and they might find their way back to whatever their parents are doing because it makes sense.
Yeah. I think give them time to realize what actually works for them.
Exactly.
So, what are some of the common patterns and cycles that get passed down within families?
So a lot of these cycles and patterns that you're talking about, like I said, is things that you absorb when you're a child, right? Two of the biggest ones, or three I would say, is how you handle stress. What do you do when times are bad, and relationships. So again, how you handle stress, right? When things are bad, does a person shout? Does he get angry? Does he fight? Or are they very calm? Or are they the kind of person that will like recluse, and they won't talk to anybody? All of these can have a negative effect. So I came home from school, I'm having a great day, I got like, all A's and my dad had a bad day at work. He's gonna not be,
Happy.
emotionally loving towards me. So now I'm thinking, okay, why did I do this? I studied so much and I did all of this, and he doesn't give a shit or care. So it kind of affects you negatively. The second one is relationships, right? How do they treat their wives or their spouses? Again, their relationship with children, with others, with friends, and that trickles down by saying, okay, when the child grows up, how are they going to treat their family? I mean, it's so common to see that, because like our parents, when they were building their life, they had to struggle, they had to work hard. Many of them were absent parents. The mom was the one who was taking care of the child. So
The
there,
only caregiver.
exactly. So every behavioral pattern, every sense of how to do things has been learned by the mom. And then the father shows up when you're like 18, 19, saying, okay, now, be a man, do this thing, and whatever. And it doesn't work. The second is also with women, where if there's a son, they're expected, like the son is going to take over, and maybe the daughter has the intent and the ability and the capability to actually take over the business, but no, it's going to be the son. That goes to a cultural thing as well, that women are not as well respected, or their authority is not taken in as high of a standard as a male. So this can be something that can be learned from the father, if the relationship with the mother was something of like, look, I am the breadwinner, you're just taking care of the house. The child can learn that. Same thing, both son, daughter, they both can learn that, and they can find their self-worth based on that, which gets tricky, moving down the line. And I think the last thing, which I think is very important, is tough times. This one really has, its fingers in multiple aspects. One, let's say I start a new venture. It's doing great. Tough times. What do? Do I panic? Do I get scared? Do I recess? Do I stop? Do I freeze? Or do I push forward? Relationships, right? Sometimes you marry into a house that you've never had tough times, but they have, and they know how to deal with it. They know there's ups and downs in business, there's ups and downs in life. You come into the picture, they have a downtime, you start freaking out now. Like, what am I supposed to do? They're not doing so well. We can't go on our 3 holidays and vacations. So you start stressing out, and that starts to build a rift between maybe the husband and wife, or the family, or like the mom's panic now goes on to the children. Like, okay, times are hard, but it's not really that, right? They're used to like things coming back up, and they know this is the flow of things. So it really becomes a situation where people need to understand where things are, and it's a lot of self-reflection, to know, one, why am I feeling like this? Because take a step back, like pause. Okay, I'm getting stressed, something happened, why is that happening? Okay, I know that parental figure, when things were bad, they were stressed. I don't have to be stressed. There's a better way to do it. You have to make your own decision. If you work well in stress, great. Be stressed. Do
Yeah,
do
some
great.
people perform better under pressure.
Exactly, but they have to know that, and you have to sort of build that understanding of yourself, and that's what's going to really help you move forward, because you
Break the cycle.
exactly, because again, if you come from a place where stress has always been around because it's a motivating factor for your parents, it might not be for you. You might not perform like that. Your child might not perform like that. So if you start passing that down, there's never going to be a peak performer, because the thing you're passing down is stress and not how to perform. Um, the flip side of that is also like, you know, with there's two people, right, in usually in the world, value education and that value business and making money. So a lot of times where based on your backgrounds, it could be like study hard, be number one, and then figure yourself out, the money will come. On the other side, it's like, look, I have a business, why are you studying? But the kid is really good at it, and they're getting scholarships, they're getting into good universities, and then the parents are like, what are you doing all of this for? Like, we have everything
We
ready.
have everything ready for you to take over.
Exactly, come and sit here. So now the child is demotivated, like, I'm really doing something and nobody cares. And that's really harsh, because then he's going to have regret and resentment in the work that he's doing. So eventually, even when he comes back to the family business, or if he plans to, it's going to come from a place of resentment, like, look, I could have done this, but now I'm doing this. Where I think what parents need to do is really figure out a way of how you can bridge that gap. Look, look, I built this without any education, potentially, right? My son is now a genius. He's smart. He's good. He's going to
Or
school.
daughter.
Or daughter. My child is very smart, very good, very, inclined to learning. How do you bridge the gap? Like, what is the thing that he can add to my work that's the catalyst, or he or she can add to my work that's the catalyst to move forward? And that's really where this like conversation needs to happen with parents. I think, breaking the pattern is really like both child and parent understanding that, look, we need to sit down and talk to each other like adults, and not like, you told me to do this, so I'm going to do the opposite, or you told me to do this, I have to do this. It's like, okay, look, understand what somebody is saying, because what is communication, right? It's communicating ideas, transferring of ideas.
Correct.
That's what transpersonal psychology is. It's the transferring of ideas in any form. It could be through movement, it could be through unspoken words, it could be through expressions. But the idea is communicated. What's bad communication? I'm saying words, you're listening to words. What I'm saying is not registering to you the same way. And that's where the issue happens. So I feel like, to break the pattern, what everybody needs to do is really sit down and try to understand each other, and almost let both the guard down, right? Like, the parents have to let the guard down to be like, okay, my child may have valid points, maybe they're wrong, but when I catch that they're wrong, I guide them in a way that they understand. And the child also has to understand that in whatever way we feel we were rebellious, our parents aren't our enemies, and
They only want the best.
they want the best, but their delivery is wrong, right? And sometimes things trigger you. I have a very short trigger with my parents. I hate to say it, but it's true. After like studying psychology is actually when I started to build a better relationship with them, because I started to self-reflect
Yeah.
and understand where they're coming from. And that's how you kind of need to break the cycle, where the communication needs to be really open and really honest. And it not only in the sense that we're communicating, but they're finding action items that,
Yeah.
okay, you want to study? Fine. I want you to join my business. Fine. Where's the common ground? Like, would you be open to studying an MBA program? Would you be open to learning economics? And will that work for you? And that's where you find the common ground. And I think that's where really like a breakthrough will happen.
Okay, now I would like to discuss a topic that's very important for. What is the cost of being a privileged child?
Oh, I think it's quite high, actually. It's really interesting because a lot of times privilege, like in today's world, is a very negative term, right? Like, there's eat the rich, you're privileged, white privilege. In general, it's really like feels like a very loaded word and a loaded sentiment that being privileged is bad. So to start off with, maybe let's explain what's the privileged child, just so we have an understanding of it. So someone from privilege can vary, right? So having a roof over your head is privilege. Having the not to worry about paying for school and education, I think, is a very big privilege. And when you go higher and higher, it gets interesting, right? Oh, do you have nice cars? Have you always been growing up around help around the house? Or do you go on holidays? Do you go on vacations? Things come easy to you, right? You make a demand and you get it. So that really is where privilege starts to form within children. And they start understanding from a very young age, like, oh, I never have the need for anything. And I think that is what truly defines what privilege means is, do you ever have the feeling of want and the need, or missing the feeling of, oh, I want something and it wasn't delivered? The flip side, where it starts becoming negative, is when privilege comes with expectations. Sometimes you have expectations of family reputation, right? Like, there's a certain way you have to act, there's a certain way you have to behave, there's a certain way you dress, you can't say things, you can't do things, you're supposed to look a particular way. The other side is sort of when it comes to success. Yes, you have privilege, great, what are you going to do with it? You were given a great education, you were given the family business, and it is now your responsibility to grow it and not squander all of the things that we gave you. So when it comes to like between children moving into the adolescence, into teenagers, they start looking at life from a perspective of either like, I'm gonna take what I have and it's really valuable, and how do I really like make the most of it? And if that's what the child is thinking, he's pretty evolved. most of the
Most
times
of the time, yeah.
most of the times we fall into this phase of people starting to think I'm better than you, and by you I mean probably general people, and that again is something that trickles down because you've seen that, hey, I'm in a nice car, the other person is not. What I really respected for one of the school, my school that I went here was we had uniforms. We weren't allowed nice things. We weren't allowed to wear a watch. We weren't allowed to wear different shoes because that set the stone for everybody that no matter what your background is, we're all equal here, and that really helped me grow and understand. And not until I was in my 20s that I figured out that I have certain things that other people don't, and this is just not how.
Think cost of being a privileged child. And I think in many ways, my conclusion is, correct me if I'm wrong, the cost is freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of deciding what you want for your life, and freedom of becoming who you want to be. Because I think when you come from privilege, it's more controlled than people who are unprivileged.
Yeah, 100%. I think privileged and protected go hand in hand, right?
Right.
So when protected can also then turn into being sort of not possessive, but very like secure and confined, because that is a way of how we've been protected. So, hey, don't go there, don't eat certain things, don't do certain things, don't talk to certain people. And when you start getting into the real world, it gets tricky because hey man, I like this guy. I want to hang out with him, but maybe he can't do the same things I can, or I don't feel comfortable doing the same things this person is doing, like going by train or the bus. I mean, like I'm in New York, going by the metro. It's like billionaires and everyday people are using the metro because it's the same thing, and that's kind of
Convenient.
it's convenient. So at that point they've broken down the association of like having a car is privilege to transportation is just transportation. And where it comes to a cost of freedom is really like in relationships that you have, like can you build genuine relationships with people, and can they also accept you, because it's not only your how you respond to others. Society as a whole has felt that privilege is negative, so sometimes they look at you and they're like, oh, rich bald kid, I don't know, if I'm going to get along with him. And at that moment, again, every household is different, right? So you can say like, oh yeah, let's go for a movie. And for them, maybe a movie was a special treat. So is that privilege? I mean, who defines that, right? So it's really, again, it has to come to a point where now people are getting more open to changing the way they communicate.
Let's discuss a child's sense of self-worth and identity formation. As we know, it happens at a very young age. So how can the pressure to live up to high expectation change this?
So yes, the pressure of overperforming in privilege is quite high because it really puts a lot of strain on the child. When they're growing up, they're always told that you have to become something, you have to do something, and if you're not, they also have a sense of self-worth, right? Like even as children, we understand, are things going good or not, and if we're not given the right kind of positive reassurance, we really start to get stressed, and then it almost gets to a point of inaction. And what I mean by that is when I do certain things or when a child does certain things and they're not met with a good response, where they're not meeting up to that expectation, the third or fourth time, they're not going to do it. They're going to be very afraid. And now you're introducing a new element, which is fear. When I think a parent's role is more about support and growth. So now you're introducing fear, fear to perform, fear to, take action, take the next step. So when it starts building the child's personality, you'll see these traits coming into relationships or communication or, general interactions where everything that they're doing feels like it's scrutinized and judged, and I think that is really really detrimental to a child's growth.
Yeah, I think when we're kids, we look up to our parents, right? Everyone does. And how the parent makes us feel about ourselves is what we decide we're going to feel about ourselves. So, for example, let's say I'm a footballer and I'm average, but if my parents keep saying I'm below average, I will not even realize that I'm average or a little above. I will always think I'm below. I think, how they view you, you start to view yourself. So I think it's really important, I think that's where the battle is how they view you and how they make you feel about yourself. Because they may not realize that the language that they use will have a huge impact on how you feel later on about yourself. Your self-esteem, your self-worth will be completely based on their words and their actions when you were kids.
Yes, 100%. I mean, this touches the point of like competitiveness. And it's not only within the children, but it's also within the parents, right? Like, oh, my child is doing this. Is your child doing that? Or like their child is doing this. We've all heard the thing like somebody else's kid is doing this. Why aren't you doing that? And it's like, well, I'm doing 20 other things. Are they doing that? And sometimes that's not well received. So, like you said, I could be scoring 90%, and or a child could be scoring 90%, and if the parent is expecting 98, 99, they're going to feel terrible because they're like, well, I'm not there yet.
I'm not good enough.
I'm not good
90
enough.
is not good enough.
90 is not good enough. What's the end goal, right? Is the end goal happiness? Is the end goal success? Is the end goal to getting into university? There's different paths to one destination. And sometimes with parents and this familial expectation that this path got me here. So this path is the only path for my child, and that's what's going to get them there as well. But that might not be true because a child might have different talents, different abilities that can help them get to the same goal. And that's really what goes into, some of the resolution of how do we get beyond the cost of privilege into turning that privilege into something that's more beneficial.
So tell us, what are some of the most common coping mechanisms that privileged children use to manage the burden of a family's expectations of them?
So yeah, substance abuse is probably the most prevalent. I think with that, there's a lot of negative side effects. Another one I've seen is rebellion. Being rebellious makes the child feel now empowered, and that I think is a very dangerous coping mechanism because it can again trickle into very different aspects. But food has been one of the things that culturally it's available for us, and we value food a lot.
It's comfort.
Yeah, which now is getting into obesity and other health problems. So when you find an escape, whatever that may be, that's really how children find a way to like move away from what their reality and the stress of it is.
I think whatever makes them feel empowered.
Exactly. I think that's a very powerful word, what makes them feel empowered and what makes them feel good and what makes them happy, right? That's the goal for life, right? Is to be happy. And for some, it's doing work and doing business and succeeding and having their own podcast. But for others, it's like, I'm happy when I eat. I'm happy when I shop. Like that's another big one where when it comes to privilege, it's shopping, and that now goes into like a very negative side of having nice things. So again, you don't want your personality to now be built on the way that you coped. Look, I'm not saying that they're all bad. For some people, it's working out. Some people go to fitness, go for runs, go hiking. But everything has a limit, right? Like, yes, food makes you happy sometimes. You should know where to stop. Working out makes you happy sometimes. You should know where to stop as well, because if you're overexerting just to get it out, it leads to injuries. A really interesting one that I've seen recently is people getting tattoos because they want to feel the pain, and the pain helps them forget the emotional pain. So the physical pain is now a replacement. What happens when you get used to the pain of the tattoo? Like, what's the next stronger thing? So when it comes to coping, one of the the most dangerous things that I feel in this scenario is what happens when something is kind of makes you numb and you're trying to find the next replacement.
So it's very interesting how we went from, discussing cost of being a privileged child to the pressures of being a privileged child to coping mechanisms, because mostly it's escapism. Can you advise our listeners how parents can foster a healthy relationship between ambition, self-acceptance, and their expectations?
Sure. I think the most important thing is awareness. A lot of times, most individuals lack awareness and self-awareness. So one, it's understanding that, okay, am I being too harsh? Is the pressure getting too high? And also being able to read their child, or read anybody they're with. It could even be like their spouse. So I think it's very important for parents to understand how their children are coping or behaving, and noticing that, because sometimes it's like, oh, is my child going out a lot? Are they eating too much? Are they doing something that's out of the ordinary? And a lot of times, the parent might think like, oh, this is them just being a kid, let them eat or let them play video games. Oh, we've all heard the thing like, don't use your phone so much. But it's not just like the child is using that. Again, it could be because of something that's happened in the past. This is their way of building an addiction. And how do you find a way that you're bringing your child out of it? Also having an open conversation. Simple things, I think it's very important. How's your day doing? How's your day going? What did you do today? Is anything bothering you? Are you happy? Like, when was the last time somebody asked somebody, or you, like, are you happy? It's a very simple question that really goes overlooked. Yeah. And I think that's important. But what's also really, really important is giving somebody a safe space to then emote. What's tricky or what might get complicated is sometimes the child is feeling a lot of pressure, but when the parent asks, are you okay, they might explode. Now, if two people explode, we're never going to find a common ground. Yeah. So there has to be somebody who's, unfortunately, being the punching bag, but you take it and you listen and you try to understand. And I think it's important to notice, like, look, your child is going through something. This is not the time to be the authority. This is not the time for tough love. This is the time where you need to soften up, you need to open up, and you need to help them find their way out of this situation. And
yeah, I think parent figure is one figure in your life that you want complete acceptance from.
Exactly.
And I think when you get that, it really builds on your self-worth and self-acceptance. If your parents feel like, okay, you're not good at studies, or you're not good at sports, or you're not good at this, you're a quiet child, you're not as open-minded or as open to communication as I am, but that's okay. And then you start to feel good about yourself. You start to feel a high worth because you realize that it's okay how I am. Right. If they're not trying to change you, if they try to accept, I think acceptance is a huge thing, according to me.
100%.
When there's acceptance in that relationship, the parent is really helping you build on your self-worth and your acceptance of yourself.
Right. It's acceptance, it's support, and it's positive reassurance. Now, we gave the example of, a child performing really good in school at 90, but the parents want 95. But you really need to give that positive reassurance even at 90, even at 50, that they feel like, look, I went from 90 to 91. Oh my God, it was the best thing in the world. My parents are so happy. Everybody's so happy. So now they feel like, what, when I get to 92, I'm going to get even more. Imagine how happy my parents will be when I'm at, 95. It's a little bit of bribing, but I don't mean that in the bad way, because it is like sometimes that works, right? Like, that's what is the motivation for your child?
Yeah, there has to be incentive.
There has to be an incentive.
Yeah.
We all as human beings work on incentive.
Yes.
And there's different kinds, right? There's the love languages, right? Is it gifts? Is it words of affirmation? Is it physical touch? Is it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So what does your child respond well to? When you give them praise, they feel really happy. When you go out and you tell, like, oh, look at my kid, he got 90, and everybody says, wow, that's amazing, that's great. Again, you're doing the comparison, but you're making your child the hero. You're making your child the star. And that's what's going to make them motivated. Again, now if they're a shy person, you don't do that. Maybe they're like, you know what, you did well, here's another hour of playing video games, or I'm not going to say anything, or I'm going to make your favorite dish. So I feel like when it comes to this relationship, the way you celebrate them, the way you applaud them, the way you reward them plays a vital role, because we're all working towards a reward. We're all working towards something that's better than what we have. And when you're a child, there's not like business that, okay, I did so good and I'm going to get there. And yes, it could be you study a lot and you get into a great university. Fantastic. But I want to share that, right? Children want to share that. Without also being like rubbing it in somebody's face. So within the family, when it's kind of close, celebrate that, make them feel good, make them feel happy. Back to like one of the examples that we gave of if somebody is like a Sachin Tendulkar or a doctor or a businessman, And even if your child wins a singing competition or a drawing competition, or they get really good grades and you don't feel that's important, reward them so that they feel like, look, I this was something my parent was not even interested in, and look how happy they got.
Yeah.
But imagine now if I go to do something in the field that they want me to do it. Oh my God, I'm gonna be on top of the world. Like I'm gonna be on cloud nine, and that's the motivation. So I feel like breaking the barrier of here is what you have to do in an authority is great. Use the benefit of being an authoritative figure, use the benefit of being a role model to give the child the reassurance, the acceptance, the validation that what they did has value, and then build on that, right? Like if it is like, great, you did something good here, now if you just do a little bit better there, like I'm going to take you on a holiday, or we're going to go for a movie, or we're going to do something, and like give them an indication, like show them what's going to make you happy, but also celebrate what's making them happy. And I think that's really the way to find a common ground, because how do you expect the child to make you happy when you're not making them happy, or you're not celebrating their happiness?
So we live under a certain amount of societal and family pressure, and we have this dire need to please the society, our families, and the norms, live up to them. And some of the most common expectations that families and societies place on individuals around education and career paths, as you know, in our culture, are very standard.
Really hard. I think you need a lot of self-understanding to say, look, I'm doing this because I know I need to do this, but I'm also doing something for myself. So for example, even with me, when I switched from engineering to industrial design, product design, it was a moment where I had to kind of put my foot down, and I'm like, I'm doing this for myself. Does it make them unhappy? It doesn't matter to me. Does it make my parents unhappy? It doesn't matter. Do they understand it? Maybe not. I found my path, and I think you have to have trust and self-trust that you will kind of find the right path. And when you waver, you can always go back for help, right? Even if it's an authority, they might not, you might not feel like you can. I think that's the balance that you strike, is letting go of the ego, which is very important, to say, okay, I'm doing something, I might need help, and finding a person that can help you. Sometimes it's a mentor, sometimes it's a friend. And again, where you're getting acceptance doesn't always have to be your parent. So going back to my example of when I switched from engineering to product design, there was a lot of unhappiness, and I was like, look, I'm doing this for myself because I really feel like this is where I can contribute the most, and I'm going to bring most value to the world. From there, when I moved now to psychology, it was sort of this like coming together again. Okay, like now we're happy again. Now we're like doing things again. And at that moment, I still felt bad. I was like, oh, now you're happy because I picked something that you want to do. It's not because I wanted to do it. They weren't celebrating that, oh, we're so proud of you for picking this, and they took the time to understand my idea. It was more so like, we're just happy you're going to be a doctor now. And did that bring me a certain amount of joy? Yes, because I'm also unlearning my childhood traumas and my childhood upbringing to say parental acceptance is important.
Is the most important.
Is the most important, yes. And I think that's where you need to find the balance, where, look, I'm going to do things for me, and it might make people happy, it might make them unhappy. And basically, so that's how I found, my balance. Because if you don't do things for yourself, you're always going to work towards resentment, and the pressure is going to build up. I have another example where it was a very, very, very dear friend of mine. Familial pressure, only son after 3 daughters. Father was a philanthropist, a spiritual, not a spiritual leader, but a leader for community, a developer, builder, amazing history, very well respected. Everything came down to his son. When his father was, building the empire, times were different. When the son had to do it, times were different. So now he's fighting this line between doing the right thing or growing the business, and they did not intersect. What happened was he tried to make them intersect because he didn't want to disappoint his father by wavering, and he also didn't want to disappoint the family by saying, okay, look, I can't grow my business. ended up leading to alcoholism that took his life at 32, 31. Just married. It was a very tragic story. And, I've a lot of times when in the beginning, it was just like, oh, great, we're all friends, we're all having drinks. It's fantastic. When I started to see that it's becoming a problem, you have a conversation. And again, the Indian culture doesn't talk a lot about problems. And they're like, oh, come on, man, it's just a drink. Like, it's fine, it's fine. And it got to a point where he had nobody to rely on. And it was just pressure. And it was the pressure he put on himself, even.
Yeah, because that's what we're speaking about, right? It's pressure to perform. It's that pleasing thing. I want to make sure my parents are proud of me. I want
Exactly.
to make sure my parents are happy with me. I want to make sure the society thinks I'm doing as great as my father did. That pressure is mostly self-built.
Exactly.
And it leads to destruction, it leads to resentment if you don't realize what it is that you want. You have to put what you want as well into perspective. It's not just about people pleasing, because I've seen, like you said, this example. I have a few friends as well who have, at the age of 35, 36, decided to completely go off whatever they were doing and change paths because they suddenly realize, oh, I don't want to do what the society is asking me to do. I don't want to do what my parents ask me to do. Oh, finally, I'm my own person. I'm going to choose now to put myself first. So I feel like that balance needs to start out young.
It does. You're very right because when you start like looking after yourself from a very young age, or you're trained or you're taught that what, hey, do this for you, like whatever is making you happy. This Montessori concept is becoming really popular. I think it's important, it's valuable that you do things for yourself because sometimes your resentment is not even to the authoritative figure because he's your role model or he or she's your role model. It could be to your spouse, to your friends, to your partner that's saying, okay, like, go to bed, it's late, you're working too much. And then you're like, oh, you don't understand me. You're not helping me. I need to grow my business like this. I'm doing this for us.
Yeah.
But you have to know that the people in your life kind of love you or they do love you and they're also wanting the best for you. So striking that balance is not only about with the pressure, but it's also about your relationships, your life. We talk about work-life balance. It's the same thing, pressure and life balance. You need to
Yeah.
figure it out. So how do you feel like, okay, what you need to find like a level that makes you feel content. I think that's another important concept that we didn't touch on is at how much work can I do that makes me feel content, but then there's also another expectation or other responsibilities I have in life, whether it's social, whether it's familiar, whether it's a relationship. I need to feel contentment there because we're human beings. We need this from multiple different points, right? We need an emotional connection. We need physical connection. We need, spending time with people that we love. That is just sort of a calming effect. And you can't always be on because when you're doing that, you're gonna get burnt out. Then go to their coping mechanism, which now has a different effect. So you see, there's a chain. And at some point, like you have to be aware, like, look, I am falling into this pattern. I need to break it. And you need to go back to something that really is filling you back up again. I use this analogy a lot with people that have, issues with doing too much for others. It's like you're a jar of water, and you cannot just pour, pour, pour. You need to first fill it up, and then you can pour. So when it's empty, you need to do what makes you happy again. Maybe it's watching a movie, and that's about it, right? You take Friday night off, watch a movie, and you're fine. Or you go out, go for a drive, go play sports, do whatever,
Yeah.
and you're fine. Have a drink even, that's okay. When you start overdoing one or the other is when things get into like, let's say the red zone.
Yeah.
And you just need to be aware that, look, I'm going into this zone. It happens, but bring yourself back and find somebody that you can, kind of confide in that's saying, okay, look, I've been really stressed at work. My parents are kind of really hard on me. Can we just like sit and do nothing even, just don't even just be in silence. I like being around you. I like, let's just go for, a movie or dinner and find what makes you happy because that's really, really important.
So you left home to study abroad. And a lot of individuals, young individuals, especially from our country and other countries nowadays, leave at an early age to study, to work, to experience different cultures and countries. But this comes with a lot of internal and external struggles. families may feel like, oh, you're a young adult, you're going to explore the world, see this, see that. People who are sending you don't really understand that this comes with a lot of struggles. Can you explain some of these internal and external struggles that young adults face?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not all, roses and rainbows when you go away from your home country alone to study somewhere or work. You're very young usually, and you're still like understanding life. So, some of the things are like, will you assimilate well? Will you be able to communicate well? Will you be able to get your ideas across? And the other thing is certainly finding community, right? Because you're alone there. Sometimes you're in a dorm, sometimes you're living alone. So, how do you find that sense of there's people I can rely on?
There's no sense of belonging. I
There's no
think
sense of
that's one of the
belonging.
biggest internal struggles.
Exactly, because you are a transplant, right? You're an expat, you're a transplant. You're now put into this different culture where things are different. So now you're learning everything from zero. What we see in the movies is not what reality is. So I'll tell you, a few of the biggest struggles. So one of them is loneliness. That's because we don't know who to call when something goes wrong. We don't know where to go for help. The other is communication. It's again, maybe there's a little bit of self-consciousness, fear of like communicating, making friends. Will they accept me? The other is also the pressure of like, now that I'm here, I have to perform. So
Yeah.
you can't always be like, again, on, right? You have to build that social life. That is how you're going to become a well-rounded adult and a well-rounded individual. And mostly it's when all of these things start to like creep in and the enjoyment is a lot less. This becomes like a pressure, and it feels like, oh my god, like, did I make the wrong decision? Like, should I just have been back? And I think almost everybody that I've spoken to has had this conversation. If you can't do that really well, it's going to eat into you, because you're going to feel like, I don't have friends here, I don't have people here that if I just want to kind of hang out, like, it's not. And everything that's happening today is working towards people not interacting a lot. And I feel like that becomes an issue where you find ways like, I don't need to talk to people. I just order stuff on my phone. I just do things myself. I watch my own movie, and I'm happy. And that's a self conversation that a lot of people have. Like, oh, I'm happy staying at home and watching a movie. And yes, you can be, but you need social interaction. You
Yeah.
need social interaction to grow.
I think we're built for that.
Exactly.
So, do you feel like when you study or work abroad, does it change your cultural identity?
I think it definitely does, because you're this is becoming your new normal, and you're slowly, I'm not saying forgetting, but you're like, this is my 90% of my life now, and this is my new normal. So when you come back and you have interactions here, you're thinking from that perspective, right? For like your example that you gave, an example that I felt was going to people's houses. So when it's in India, I can just call up my friends or just knock on their door. Even if they're not home, I'll hang out with their parents, and they'll give me food. But when you're abroad, it's like, hey, are you free this weekend? Can we make a plan? Are you okay? And what that taught me was respect. And I'm not saying that what we're doing is not respect, but I saw that asking people and thinking about others and taking their time, their commitments, their feelings into consideration was really powerful. Because now when somebody says, hey, I'm busy, I'm like, okay, it's not like, oh man, how can you not meet me?
Be offended.
Exactly. And even with families, like, that's what I taught my parents as well. Like, hey, they're busy. Like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to like feel bad that they couldn't come home to meet me or meet you or whoever. And now that they've also been traveling, and they've been hearing me say this, they also do the same thing, where they'll first call and like and say, can we come over? Before it was, I'm outside your door, please open up. So, there's these perspective changes that happen. And I think that the biggest reason this happens is for like generations, humans have the tendency to evolve, adapt, and assimilate, right? That's how we've come into to existence. So when we start, having these different experiences, we start to grow, we start to change, and now we're learning new things. So when we start to like think in that way, we bring those back, and we're sort of creating change here. So, by going out, by having these new experiences, by changing yourself, coming back and teaching, maybe not teaching, but sharing those experiences with your family, I think that really changes the culture and sort of starts this new path of how life can be and should be and could be. So I do think that the human nature of being adaptable and assimilating is great. So you shouldn't be afraid to like sort of go out and try new things.
Yeah, I think if you travel to different countries and you experience different cultures, you pick up different segments or different fragments of each one of them. And I think that completely changes your own cultural identity in the end. If you come back after 10 years, having worked in different countries or having studied in different countries, when you come back, you change purely because you've picked up so much without even realizing.
And something that's interesting is your relationship with authority changes.
Yeah.
So when you're in India, we always, when you go to school, it's like teacher, ma'am, professor, sir. But when you're in another country, you're calling them by their first name.
Yeah.
You're saying, hey John, hey Sam, hey whatever. And then you start like not being so afraid that this is an authority. Like, yes, it's there. You know that I respect this person, and you're not going to talk to them as you would talk to a friend. But you start to realize it's almost internally growing, right? You start to like grow as well, and you feel like, look, I'm also a person of authority now, that I am speaking to the CEO on a first name basis.
Yeah.
Which in India is you have to be another CEO to speak to another CEO on a first name basis.
Right.
And this also gives them this sense of confidence when they come back, like, okay, you know what, whatever the company is, you work at Google and you see the CEO, you're like, hey, Sundar, like, it was really nice to meet you. If you say Mr. Pichai, you're going to be like, okay, why are you being weird? So I think that's when you come back, you're like, hey, you know what, I came and I know Sundar on a first name basis. And it gives everybody that sense of growing up.
So lastly, I want to talk about something that's very important as far as mental health is concerned. I want to end the episode with a very important term called inner critic. Very interesting book also called The Little Voice in Our Head by Mo Garat. I don't know if you've heard of that. But it's very interesting that we have a voice completely always telling us what to do, how to think, how not to think. And we need to adjust that voice in terms of adjusting our perspective. So while I'm talking to you, the voice in my head is probably like, oh, his hair is not done properly. Why is he wearing a grey t-shirt? Did he not wear a white shirt? His shoes look casual. Even while I'm having a conversation, that little voice doesn't end, right? Everybody has that little voice in their head. So I just feel like this little voice also self-criticizes and self-analyzes a lot all the time. While I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, are my teeth looking okay? I hope I don't have lipstick on it. I hope my hair is done properly today. Am I looking really fat? Am I looking really thin? So this constant voice, this constant inner critique, can you tell us can you explain firstly how this works, what it is, and how it affects our daily life and decision making?
Of course. And this comes from a place of perfection, right? Or wanting perfection. And it's really interesting because everything that you said was visual, but none of the things that you doubted was the content that we're talking about. Because there's a certain level of confidence in the content that we're talking about that you're like, okay, that I don't need to worry about. I need to worry about the color of his shirt and how my hair looks. And I think when the inner critic comes into play, it is the thing that is probably the thing that we're most insecure about and what we worry about, right? So when you have a conversation with yourself, what is the thing that you're saying? Are you your biggest champion or are you your biggest critic, right? Everything can be perfect, but you'll still find something like, like I could have changed that. Or, after this thing on the way back home, I'm going to think I could have said something differently. With this little voice, what can happen is the little small task that you do can also feel really big.
Give us an example.
So like, if you just go down to like get a cup of coffee with a friend, is it like, oh my God, I have to go get a cup of coffee, like let me dress up, let me do my makeup, let me go out, let me look nice, let me put on my nice bag or whatever? Or is it just like, okay, I'm gonna dress and go? Because at that point you're like, I'm really care about meeting my friend, not how I look. So how does this happen, right? Now, are you sacrificing your sleep because you need to be very prepared to go to work? Or are you now trying to stay at work longer and sacrificing your personal life because you're like, okay, I need to really perform well? And going back to sort of privilege and pressure and familial expectations, it's your inner critic is usually formed because of all of these things. Right. What is the expectation? Is it expectation to always look good? Is it the expectation of always performing? Is it the expectation of I need to get somewhere? And then the last one is comparison, right? Like we compare ourselves a lot to others. Others compare themselves to us. And we've been used to like sort of hearing that like, oh, look at this one son and Sharma ji ka beta and this one and beti and this and that. And this really has a negative effect where if you let that voice get too big, it's not a little voice anymore.
How do you fine tune that voice? Because that voice is never going away. We will always have the little voice in our head. We will always have that back thoughts or the subconscious mind telling us what to say, how to move, how to do. How do you fine tune?
Yeah, so great question. And what's interesting is I feel like the theme of our conversation today has been a dichotomy. And like I said, privilege has both good and bad. Here's another kind of hot take. I think it's ego. I think here is when your ego is important. You need to build your ego. You need to have that ego that says, you know what, I look good. What I'm saying is going to be the right thing. What I'm going to do is going to be enough. How I'm going to react today and act today is fine. I messed up. It's okay. You spilled coffee on your shirt in a meeting. It's fine. Nobody's going to remember.
Yeah, the world doesn't end.
The world doesn't end. And it really is like your ego in this scenario is not making you feel like I am better than somebody else, which is like the negative aspect, but it is I am good enough and I am going to crush it. And today, you know, I can have showed up in my PJs and had this conversation and people will still listen because what we're having is really important. And that's what I mean by like, you know, kind of protecting your ego. Yeah. And building your ego.
So that little voice in your head needs to be confidence.
Exactly.
Whatever you're doing, whatever you're deciding is good for you. It's going to make it happen for you. Things are going to work out in the end. It's that confidence, right? That no matter what, life will work it out for me.
Exactly. And again, you can now start piecing these puzzles together, where it's like, look, if something goes wrong, I have my family. I have certain amount of privilege. I have friends. There's help. You can call a therapist. You can go out. Nothing is the end of the world except the end of the world. So until you feel at a point where like, you know, that everything is ending, and I'm not saying feel it like it actually is, you can always find your way back. But now how do you take and build this ego into this positive aspect, right? Because it's easier said than done.
In what ways can self-compassion, mindfulness, and other holistic practices support the process of freeing oneself from self-criticism?
I think it is one of the most powerful tools. I think everything that you mentioned are probably extremely powerful tools to help. So my thesis was on the benefits of a guided meditation to improve the well-being and quality of life for employees working in the tech industry. You know, a few years back, everybody in the tech industry was extremely stressed, very cutthroat. And I did a study where I conducted a guided meditation with half a group of individuals and the other half didn't. And we measured their level of perceived stress and idea of well-being. And the individuals who were not meditating had almost the same level of stress as individuals like in a refugee war-torn situation, because they just felt that life was so hard to cope with.
Thank you so much for this deep and meaningful and thought-provoking conversation. We are really lucky to have had you on this show, and it's a privilege that before going back to the US, you made some time for us and had this great insight into freedom, privilege, working and traveling, and for parents to understand that it takes a lot for somebody to leave home and you know, make a career or make a life outside their expectations.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I think the conversation we had today was really valuable, and I hope, you know, whoever's listening, as long as they can get something out of it, you know, one person that feels heard and understood, and I could help, and you know, we gave them a solution. That exactly, that means the world.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been the Therapy Diaries. Take care of yourselves and one another.